All right, given that we are being recorded, I'll start the meeting now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Doug Chipman, Mayor of the City of Clarence, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our online council meeting. Authority to conduct this meeting online was gazetted on Friday the 3rd of April as part of the state government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As this meeting may become streamed live, or because it's recorded, it is important to note that local councils do not have the equivalent of parliamentary privilege. Anything said during the course of this meeting is subject to normal law. A copy of the full agenda for this meeting is currently available on Council's website. I note there are several alternative motions for tonight and they will be displayed while being moved and seconded. Being online necessitates some divergence from our usual meeting procedure. I will announce each item in the usual way and seek a mover and seconder. All aldermen will then have an opportunity to speak to each motion and are invited to indicate their intention to do so in the chat column. Normal timing applies for the debate and a tone will sound when time is up. The mover will then have the opportunity to sum up. Voting on motions will be more time consuming. I'll declare the voting open and the General Manager will put a voting box in the chat column on the side of your screen. Aldermen will be asked to vote yes, no or abstain. And once all the votes are received, I will close the voting and the General Manager will display the voting record and I will then announce the result. To accommodate this different voting system, a number of agenda items have been starred with the intention that they be dealt with in one omnibus vote. Before calling for that vote, I will go through the list of starred items to invite any comments or questions from aldermen. We have no questions on notice, 3 recent questions without formal notice, and 2 deputations from members of the public, which I'll ask the GM to read out at the appropriate time. I do need to advise members of the public this meeting is conducted in 2 parts. The first is open to the public, and when the open business is concluded, the live stream and recording will cease so that the council can deal with several confidential matters. I would now like to formally open the meeting, and in accordance with our usual custom, please join me for our council prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech thee to vouchsafe thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. I'd also like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on tonight and acknowledge elders past and present. I'd now like to introduce each alderman in turn and confirm attendance. Deputy Mayor, Alderman Heather Chong.
Present.
Alderman Luke Edmonds.
Present.
Alderman Brendan Blomley, sorry, out of alphabetical order there.
Present.
Alderman Dean Ewington.
Present.
Alderman Richard James.
Present.
Alderman Wendy Kennedy.
Present.
Alderman Tony Mulder.
Present.
Alderman John Pears.
Present.
Alderman Sharon Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Present.
And Alderman James Walker.
Present.
And Alderman Beth Warren.
Present.
Thank you very much. Now move to the starred items. The first is item 2, confirmation of minutes, so the 6th of April. As circulated, be taken as read and confirmed. And I understand there are a couple of comments there. Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to point out on page 34, with the voting there, it has been recorded that I actually abstained or didn't vote. It may well have been a technical problem on the night, as this was our first online meeting, but I actually voted for. I'd just like that to be put on record. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll correct that. And Alderman Warren, I think you might have had an issue as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Similarly, the item in closed meeting regarding a tender, it has me as abstaining, but I did in fact vote for that motion.
Thank you very much. Are there any other corrections to the minutes or comments?
Alderman James, yes, Mr Mayor, there was a reference to the breakwater and the public pier in Kangaroo Bay, which was an item in the workshop, because I raised it in the workshop, and that has to be, I believe, included in the minutes under the heading council workshops at that time when we, in the minutes of the meeting.
Thank you, Alderman James. We'll have that so recorded. Any other comments? Thank you. The second start item is that council notes the workshops conducted on the 20th of April and the agenda brief on the 24th of April. The next start item is tabling of petitions, and there are none to be presented for tonight.
I have a question, Mr Chairman, I have a question in relation to petitions. At the last meeting, there was a motion that was moved in relation to the Bellerive village traffic matters, and I understand there was to be a officer's report tabled with respect to that petition, and it was my understanding it was going to be presented to us on the 20th or the next council meeting in April. Perhaps the General Manager could explain as to whether or not we will be able to deal with that petition, as it's been customary in the past to take on board that a petition and for council to deal with it in the form of an officer's recommendation and put to the vote by the elected representatives.
I think that was explained at the last council meeting. It was dealt with during a motion on notice by Alderman Blomley, Alderman James, so there's no further action expected from the staff on that. Are there any other matters in regard to petitions?
Yeah, before we go on, Mr Mayor, it's still relevant. Does that mean that in future...
No, it doesn't, Alderman James. I'm afraid that was dealt with that time. It may be in future that one can be dealt with by a notice on motion, but it may well be dealt with by an officer's report. The only requirement is that it be dealt with by a certain period of time under the Meeting Regulations and Local Government Act, and we met that criteria.
There's a lot of maybes there, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item, start item, is reports from outside bodies. I'll just note that for the Coffee Refuse Joint Site Authority, the quarterly report for March is pending. Do you have anything to add to that, Alderman Walker?
No, I don't. So I'll chase that up, but I'm expecting to have the next meeting in May. So I'll chase it up there if it hasn't been done by then.
Thank you. For TasWater Corporation, there's a owners representative group information session at 10:30 tomorrow, which I will be attending. I understand we'll be getting information from TasWater in regards to potential dividends. So very keen to find out what that meeting's about. I will certainly let everyone know once I find out.
Thank you.
And the Greater Hobart Committee is seeking a formal meeting during May, and I'll advise when that comes up. The next start item is reports from councils and special committees. None have been presented. Then 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports for the 6th, 13th and 20th of April be noted. Are there any comments on the weekly briefing reports?
Yes, there are, Mr Chairman, and I would like to draw council's attention to the weekly briefing report of the 13th of April 2020, and in particular to page 5, the Bellerive public pier dilapidation surveys. My question to Mr Graham in his capacity as the appropriate officer, the matter of any building damage to any of the properties that may occur, and hopefully they don't, when the pile driver or whatever the method is used to undertake the construction of the public pier / breakwater. Is there, under council's, I suppose, insurance policy and so forth, is there a provision that any of those persons who have been contacted do have any structural damage to their properties as a result of the drilling. Is that sort of an issue that would be handballed to our insurance company to deal with in the first instance?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, it'd be considered as a contractual matter with the contractor, and I would envisage that the contractor's insurance company would be dealing it as a consequence of the work. But I could envisage that the contractor's engineers and our engineers would assess the situation at the time.
Okay, I have a question in relation to the 20th of April, but I'll wait my turn if there's someone else wants to raise a matter with regard to the 13th of April, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions in regard to the weekly briefing reports?
I'd like to raise in relation to the 20th of April, excuse me, the revised South Arm Oval Draft Master Plan Community Consultation. I note on page 2 that it covers a lot of issues in relation to the men's shed, conceptual layout of the children's play space and so on. And there's going to be some consultation in relation to community support for the new men's shed and location. Is it envisaged that there may be, given it's a revised South Arm draft master plan, which includes a skate park, is there going to be any reference to the community in relation to that? Or is it basically a closed consultation process in relation to the men's shed and any equipment and design for the new play space?
Mr. Graham, are you able to assist there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's not a closed consultation. The community will receive plans indicating the location of the new men's shed and potential play equipment for the children, but also potential sound attenuation for community engagement purposes.
Mr. Graham, will that be, because the way I read the circular, it doesn't address that, but you've actually answered my question, because it does mean that there is, as I would suggest, an opportunity for people to have input in relation to the skate park. Thanks.
Thank you. There being no other questions, the final start item is determination of petitions, and there are none. So now I invite a mover and a seconder, please, to accept all the start items as recommended.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Blomley, seconded Alderman Chong. Voting's open.
I haven't received my...
It'll come.
Thanks very much.
Just waiting on two more.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, it's not asking to submit, is that correct?
Yes, after you vote, you need to submit the vote.
It's not asking to, that's all I'm saying on my screen at the moment. It's just...
In that case,
hold on. It's just,
sorry?
I've just rebooted it now. And it's telling me unable to reach.
I think
An
you
error has occurred.
might have a connection problem, Alderman Kennedy.
Can we take your vote orally then and record it that way, please? And there's one other not
Yes.
recorded.
Somebody else hasn't voted.
So I was yes.
Thank you. Okay,
And
voting. the voting's closed. We'll have to find out who didn't record.
Okay.
I don't suppose there's a maximum of 10 votes allowed on this app, is there?
I voted early. Is it registering?
Let's have the response up and we'll go through it. We just have to do this and get it right. I'm sorry.
So the response is up now. I'm just trying to work out who we're missing.
Pearsy, yours isn't there.
Yes, it's Alderman Pearce and Alderman Kennedy.
So how are you voting, John?
I voted then. I voted yes the first time, but I may have done it too quickly. Is it up now or if it's closed?
Well, it's closed now, so I'll take you as a yes.
Yes.
So that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, Mayor's communication. I have tabled the significant calendar items for the last 3 weeks. Needless to say, they've all been online and there's a lot fewer than there used to be. I will, however, point out that one meeting was a WebEx with the local government minister, and I did circulate the outcomes of that meeting separately and to all the aldermen, so hopefully you've received that. Moving on to item 5, declarations of interest of aldermen or close associate. Are there any? Moving on to item 7, public question time. There's no matters at items 7.1 and 7.2 or 7.3. 7.4, questions technically without notice. General Manager, I understand you have 3. Could you read them out, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a letter from the Australian Services Union raising 3 questions without notice. There's some context around the questions, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll simply read the questions. The first question is, can the General Manager provide assurances to Clarence City Council's employees that no employee will have their employment terminated as a result of COVID-19 and that Council will prioritise the maintenance of employment of each of their employees in any budgetary decision moving forward? The second question is, can the General Manager assure employees of Clarence City Council that the management team will enter into consultation before any major changes are implemented in the workplace? And question 3 is, can the General Manager provide a guarantee that all possible alternative duties will be explored before considering standing employees down, including things that are usually outside of Council's core business, to assist the community with getting through and recovering from COVID-19. The Union can provide further details and suggestions around this matter. I propose to take those questions on notice and provide a response to the ASU as soon as possible.
Thank you. Were there any other questions without notice?
No, Mayor, there were not.
Okay, moving on to item 8, deputations by members of the public. I understand we have 2. General Manager, if you could read them out, please.
Thank you. Both items or both deputations are in response to the proposal for a development at 1 Cremorne Avenue, and I will read them verbatim for Alderman. The first is from Mr. Mark Hand, who is a Cremorne resident. While the proposal for 1 Cremorne Avenue may be substantially different from the proposal submitted in September 2017, the built form of the northern and western side are similar to the proposal rejected by this planning authority and RAMPAT. It appears Council's planner has not made an assessment of the repurposed western wall. The Act requires an assessment be completed against the lot. It feels unlikely a fresh assessment of a 4 metre high, 18 metre long brick wall on an adjoining boundary in a village zone would find it reasonable. Furthermore, the planner's assessment states that the previous proposal western wall had 0 setback. In fact, the previous proposal stepped back to 1.5 metres at height of 2.4 metres and at a height of 7 metres stepped back to 3 metres. Both setbacks are greater than the current proposal at similar heights. There is a bore on my property approximately 7.5 metres from the proposed land application area. The PIPWE were notified of its existence in July 2018 and gave approval for its use in correspondence supplied to Council. E23.10P4 states horizontal separation distance from a downslope bore must satisfy all of the following. B, be no less than 15 metres. The Cremorne community has been actively working towards having Cremorne moved to a low-density residential zoning since a meeting with the former General Manager and Head of Planning in September 2017, where a request was made for an emergency amendment. The community has collected signatures in a petition that shows the majority of residents supporting the zoning change. While the Planning Authority has been bound by the current scheme, the recent advertisement of local area provisions give the Planning Authority scope to consider the provisions of an incoming scheme some weight when deciding an application using the COTI principle. I have received 2 legal opinions suggesting this is appropriate. Choosing not to do this would leave many in our community feeling underrepresented. The community would welcome an application for development of a similar density to the townhouses recently approved on Frederick Henry Parade. Mark Hand. The second deputation is from Mr. Brian Bennett of 44 Frederick Henry Parade, Cremorne, and Mr. Bennett says he's lived there since 1983. Anzac Day has prompted me to reflect on the concept of legacy, the consequence of choices that are made. Tonight, when you exercise your judgment in relation to 1 Cremorne Avenue, you will be basing much of your decision on tangible criteria and data, but you know too that Cremorne residents have strong feelings about the character and amenity of built forms in their seaside settlement. Is the legacy of tonight's decision about this proposal to be the urbanisation of this prominent site? Will it protect and enhance the character and sensitive nature of this residential seaside settlement? How will it sit against Council's own recommendation to rezone our village to low-density residential in order to stop inappropriate developments like this apartment block? The overall impression and impact of this apartment block cannot be sidelined. Concerns by Clarence officers about overlooking neighbours won't be solved by window screening. Consider what they'll look at. Officers have assessed the proposed apartment block in terms of its compliance with height and most of the setbacks and suggested that it has less mass than the 2017 proposal for this site. I contend, however, that in comparison to other built forms in our village, the building footprint, mass, relationship to streetscape and density of this proposal mean it would have a significant and negative impact, not just on immediate neighbours, but the entire community. Your legacy should be to support the 61% of available ratepayers, brackets March 2018, who, like Council itself, wish to see low-density dwellings in Cremorne, not apartment blocks. And in respect to the reference to relationship to streetscape, Mr. Bennett has put a quotation, assessments of matters as imprecise as streetscape qualities requires a consideration of what might be reasonably expected. And that's a quote from the case of Rowell and Clarence City Council 2012. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9.1, notice of motion, Alderman Mulder. If we could have the motion as he's amended it on the screen, please, General Manager. And do I have a seconder, please?
You got the motion? Okay, the motion should come up in a moment. Okay, it's up now.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't got it.
Scroll down to the bottom of the chat bar.
Yeah, we've got it now. Thank you.
Chat bar.
So, sorry, did we get a seconder?
I don't, where is it?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Alderman James.
Mr Mayor, if I may, just a point of clarification, we only have a poll for item 9.1. I can't see a copy of Alderman Moulder's motion, amended motion.
Sorry, I'll put that up right now.
Will that be in the same chat area, General Manager?
So you should be able to see that now.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
Good.
That's good.
I'll leave that up for about 30 seconds to a minute.
Alderman Moulder, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't seem to be able to get my camera working, so I don't know whether the rest of you can see me or not, but
we've only got your icon. There's no video coming through at the moment, but please continue anyway.
I'll provide the camera on and off if you like. Mr Mayor, this is a fairly straightforward motion and blatantly opportunistic. There's been a number of developments in relation to Richmond, where the issue of traffic and the inappropriateness of Wellington Road, the main road, the High Street, and also the Richmond Bridge not being able to take the volumes of traffic that are now using that particular road. Also, the point B of the motion talks about the section between Risdon Road and the Bowen Bridge, which is also near 2 lanes. Now, this whole network, we've done work in that's underway at the moment in upgrading the whole of East Derwent Highway at Geilston Bay to the 4 lanes. There is work at Cambridge, which is about connecting Richmond Road, the upgraded Richmond Road to the Tasman Highway at that Cloverleaf. And then there's a couple of these black spots, or these, shall we say, choke points on the road. So given the fact that everyone's falling over themselves at federal and state levels now to find infrastructure projects as part of the COVID-19 recovery, I'm of the view that we should be submitting, particularly the Richmond area, to that proposal, because the Richmond bypass has actually only been half built. The first section was built as a quite heavy link road, although we all know that that was just a euphemism to get the funding under the transport infrastructure rather than the commuter infrastructure. The same issues now apply to the Eastern Link Road, which would connect Brinktop Road to the existing Colebrook Road junction of the western section of that bypass. Now, the additional point was that I was of the view that we should basically submit this list. But given the views of some of the aldermen, it was a thought that this would most appropriate be at a workshop. Point C has been introduced because the General Managers issued some comments on the published agenda relating to the having the council engineers reevaluate the list of projects and advise council on the current information. Now, the purpose of my motion was not to have a lengthy engineering study on traffic movements and reporting to a future workshop as detailed. The purpose of this motion is to take advantage of the political climate and speedily nominate additional projects that have a broad community benefit and take advantage of mooted federal and state government infrastructure spending to stimulate the economy. So the idea is that we have an early workshop. This isn't the time for detailed studies of traffic movements and traffic volumes. The fact is that these roads are already experiencing a high level of traffic, and that building them, over-engineering them, gold-plating them if you like, is a very good way of dealing with the future requirements. And I'll give you an example of the 4-lane highway from the Tasman Bridge to the airport, which was actually a 4-lane highway to service, would you believe, 4 aircraft movements a day at that stage. What we have now is a 4-lane highway that is already exceeded capacity. And when this was built, it was built as part of a Roads to Recovery, or Rebuilding the Nation, I think, which was the Keating government's response to the recession that we had to have. Mr. Alderman, I compliment the things, and the workshop gives everyone an opportunity to put any other projects that may be required and that they may have in mind that they think fits the bill and ought to be on this list. As such, I would suggest that this workshop be held in May so that we are in a position to have a motion before the council at the next meeting to enable to get on this road. This is not the time to be procrastinating or doing complex traffic studies. I commend
Thanks,
the
Alderman Mulder. Alderman James Walker. No, sorry, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I have concerns about this particular motion, mainly from two aspects. Firstly, if we're going to look at including these two projects in our list of priorities, then surely we need to have some in-depth study or some particulars from the appropriate agency, DSG, because at the moment we do not have that. We have had a list and we've had representatives from DSG and I think a couple of external consultants at one of our workshops earlier in the year. And in those discussions, we did talk in detail, and in fact, I raised two projects that I thought really needed to be probably reconsidered in the pecking order of these, and that was the South Arm Highway from the Police Academy to Lauderdale, and also some in-depth study in relation to the Flagstaff Gully Link Road from where it basically finishes at the Hanson's Quarry through to, and I wouldn't expect it to go down to Clinton Road, but perhaps beyond to connect with the East Derwent Highway in a northerly direction. Having these sort of things come out at the last minute and without an in-depth sort of discussion, and we didn't have that with the department DSG reps. They weren't necessarily raised. There was more consideration given to the planned highway upgrade from the airport to Sorell. And unless we have them in the discussion and being able to provide some long-term plan or strategy, I'm reluctant to support the motion on the basis that we need to have experts, we need to have considerations from the agency that has the means to have it listed either in the short or long term, provide the facts and therefore have them in the loop. At this stage, I think it's premature and...
Alderman James, as a point of procedure, didn't you second this motion?
Yes, absolutely I did. Now that you should know, Mr Mayor, from meeting procedure, that a person can second the motion and at the same time put forward valid points in relation to why or he considers otherwise. Now, there's nothing wrong, and you are aware of the meeting procedure in that regard, surely.
Yeah,
so,
thank you. I was just clarifying that. I was a bit confused.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Thanks.
Other speakers?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'll chime in.
Thank you.
You certainly can second a motion and then express second thoughts. As Alderman Pearce, Mr Mayor, became well aware one meeting in the past. Look, the bottom line is it's timely to be having these discussions in a workshop. We can get engineers to go out and do all the number wangs, all the consultings, get all the stuff together, and by that stage all the stimulus will have come and gone. So we're committing to really not much more than a workshop at this stage. And when it comes to issues of road funding, you know, I'm pretty sympathetic to another workshop. So again, it's not really that binding on council, and that's how I'd be expressing it to aldermen that are either ambivalent or slightly concerned one way or the other.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Other speakers?
Mr Mayor, Alderman Warren speaking.
Go ahead, please, Alderman Warren.
I just have a question through you to the General Manager. How would our schedule be for having a workshop on this in May, given that we're fairly pressed to get through the budget information in that time. So I don't want to commit council to something that we can't achieve.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. I think this is one of those workshops. If we're dealing with issues at a high level, pulling projects together from the City Deal projects and other things that we know that are desirable, we should be able to do that reasonably quickly, but we will need to fit it in around the bigger issue of budget workshops.
If I can add to that, I see it as a priority because I think we should position ourselves as well as we can for any potential stimulus funding from state or federal governments. Any other speakers?
Mr Mayor, if I may, Alderman Blomley.
Go ahead, please, Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On the face of it, I was very supportive of this motion on notice when I first read it on Wednesday evening, notwithstanding the very persuasive arguments put by the seconder of the motion. I'm still of a mind that it is a valid motion and something worthy of support. Particularly the section of the East Derwent Highway between Risdon Vale and the Bowen Bridge, that's a stretch of road in our city that I travel very regularly to and from work. I think the mover of the motion is right to capture that. But also, as you point out, Mr Mayor, now is the time to strike with regards to infrastructure projects throughout our city. My biggest concern with the COVID-19 economic stimulus packages available is that, this is no criticism of anyone in particular, but I am concerned that at times Clarence isn't always on the front foot. And I think this will certainly position us well, as you point out, Mr Mayor, and as the mover of the motion did as well, to ensure that we are as best positioned as possible to avail ourselves of the funds at both a state and federal level that will be available. So, as I say, notwithstanding the arguments put by the seconder, I would just put on, we're very happy to support this fine motion by Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? Right of reply, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. In relation to Alderman James, the idea of this Section C resulted from a discussion with him, which said that he was also interested in nominating the projects which he mentioned. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Alderman James, if he wishes to progress those projects, ought to at least agree to this motion and raise them at the workshop. Now, the other thing is that there's talk about we're only nominating the projects. We're not committing to building them. That's the time that you need to do all that work. And the thing is that we nominate these projects, and that's the point at which DSG goes in there and sees whether or not they wish to elevate them up the list of priorities. The West thing is actually shovel-ready in the sense that the road reservations are already in place. So that's why that one particular one is taken up as a political opportunity. Might I also point out politically that that particular project is in the seat of Lyons and services people from Lyons. So there's a political imperative as to which might get this road up the thing. So I commend the motion and look forward to majority support.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Voting's open. We have one outstanding.
I think it could be me, Mayor, because I'm just...
Well, let's close the voting and I'll find out who it is and ask for an oral vote. Voting's closed. Oh, we've got 12 responses. There we go.
Oh, good.
Voting's closed. and the names are displayed. So thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which will be planning items. So I advise formally that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. The first item on the agenda is 11.3.1, a development application at 26 Bligh Street, Rosny Park. Recommendations for approval. I understand Alderman Pears.
Yes, I want to move an alternative motion for approval, Mayor.
Do we have a seconder for that, please?
I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Newington, I take it. So, yes. Alderman Pears, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, as you know, that this proposal is for a sign at 26 Bligh Street, which is the Eastlands complex, as we know. Now, as you also know, and it's on our report on page 14, the proposal was advertised in accordance with statutory requirements and no representations were received. Nobody objected. We know in the area of Bellerive, Montague Bay and Rosny, if people want to say something, we know they're very forthcoming in saying it. So not one objection. Now, Mayor, this sign, as we can see on page 16, it's 10.2 metres wide and 7.6 high. But it's not one bulk sign as some people may think. It's constructed using vertical timber slats with a 50% transparency down the bottom. And the sign will go on top of that. I did have a good photo of the one in Ellenbrook in WA, but of course I can't actually get that to Alderman at the moment because I only received it very, very late in the piece. But as we know, the site itself, it's on one side of the road, we know it's got the Clarence Cricket Club ground. On the other side of the road, we know it's a privately owned vacant block, which has been vacant now for a long time. And I know a lot of aldermen and council elections have their sign on there. And of course, the other side is got trees in front of it, the Woolworths place. So really, it's not really affecting anything, I believe. Now, we know that where it's going, it's not a heritage street, so that's fine. We're not interfering with anything. But one thing I would like to say that the one that was just placed in WA at Ellenbrook, which was in February, and that was done by Vicinity Centres, which own Eastlands, Northgate, etc. They were telling me today that it was started operating in February and themselves or the local government has not received any complaints of the signage, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Now, mind you, the Vicinity Group has got 14 external signs across its portfolio in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and WA. And this would be the first for them in Tasmania. But of course, the Eastlands complex is the biggest in Tasmania as well. So I think in this time of need, and you can see my reasons at the bottom of the amendment, I believe that when we're trying to support business, this is a step that we can take to support business in this area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Pears. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think John summed it up pretty well there. I mean, look, at the end of the day, guys, I mean, you know, it's a shopping centre and shopping centres have signs and they need to promote their businesses. And with all the talk that we've had recently about, you know, needing to support businesses coming out of the COVID crisis, I mean, you know, it's a no-brainer to me. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, there's no adverse impact. They've got more parking spaces than they supposedly need to have. To suggest that it's out of character with the area, I mean, is, you know, I think is just not true. And I think, you know, we should let business do what they do, which is get out there and market themselves and promote what they do and encourage people to get out there and spend their money and employ people. So I think it's it'd send a very bad message to, you know, the whole community if we're going to knock back signs like that in a you know, what is a retail area. So I think it's it's really important that we send the right signal out there and support Alderman Pear's motion in this case.
Thank you. Other speakers? Sorry, Alderman Edmonds.
Hello. Yeah, I'm in support of the alternative motion, and I just wanted to say to Alderman Pearce, thanks for all your hard work on this one. And I think the key thing for me is that it was advertised and didn't receive a single representation against. So I think this is a pretty common sense outcome and definitely has my support.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Warren.
Thank you. I'd just like to quote a couple of things from the report. So it says that the proposed digital poster panel sign would include changing messages at a rate of 1 per 30 seconds. The graphics would not be moving or flashing. Council's engineers also assessed that the sign would not cause an unreasonable impact upon traffic safety. So my question is, if the sign is not distracting the drivers, then what's the point of it? Because surely the whole point of having a sign there is to attract the attention of drivers. And I would question whether we really want to cheapen our neighbourhood by adding such a Las Vegas style sign. And do aldermen who want to support business seriously believe that the addition of this sign will increase business at Eastlands? Do you think that people who we previously would have just driven past will now see the sign and think, oh, there's a shopping centre there, I must visit? I just don't see that it's going to make a significant difference, but it will cheapen the neighbourhood. So I won't be supporting this. I'll be supporting the officer's original recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Other speakers?
Alderman James, Mr Mayor. Look, it's very interesting to obviously refer to page 16 of the officer's report. And the proposal is for a 10.2 metre wide times 7.6 metre high sign to be located within a site boundary. It's comprised of 4 metre high curved sign at the lower part constructed using vertical tipper slats with 50% transparency. In the very nature of what the officers have said in their report is that the proposal does not comply with clause E17.7.1P1, A, B and D, as it's not integrated into the design of the premises or streetscape. It will dominate the streetscape and will have an unreasonable impact on the amenity of the neighbouring properties. Notwithstanding, there has been no resident or any other business entity put in a representation. It doesn't mean that the officers would look very carefully at the planning scheme. And we've had instances in the past where there have been no representations. And the officers, by working through our planning scheme, have come up with another option. And that has been what they believe is appropriate within under the SIPS, Clarence Interim Planning Scheme 2015. I think that we pay our officers, they are professionals. They are to obviously go through the planning scheme. And in this particular case, the sign is almost of a billboard nature because it's huge. And it's going to not only distract or impact on the amenity of the area, but I don't think it's conducive to what we are trying to develop in the Kangaroo Bay with that beautiful building that we built for the cricket club some years ago, together with the other work we've done on the perimeter of Eastlands, and also the future development of the Kangaroo Bay Boulevard, which is still another matter. It will not be complementary, in my opinion, to the streetscape or to the amenity of the area, and I will not be supporting this motion. And if Alderman Warren is going to foreshadow the officer's recommendation, I will second the motion accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, Mr Mayor, I would actually like to ask Mr Lovell, what sort of deliberations have occurred with the proponent in terms of an alternative site and an alternative type of sign that would actually meet the requirements?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there's been ongoing discussions with the applicants over I think, several months. But the siting of the sign hasn't changed. That's their preferred location. There has been alterations in the design of the sign, which culminated in the one that's before you now.
Alderman Von Berto.
Just a further question. Could we actually be given some overview of what the alternatives were that the officers put to the proponent?
I think that's a difficult question and hypothetical. We are required to debate the issue at hand and its merits. Please, if you could forego that question.
I actually believe, Mr Mayor, it is an appropriate question because in terms of deciding whether or not this is the best option, it's important to know what the other options were.
But it's not for us to determine whether it's the best option or not. We need to assess this based on the planning scheme and the proposal before us.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, firstly, may I commend Alderman Pearce on this alternate motion. I think it's it's eminently sensible what he's proposing here. And at a time when there, as Alderman Pearce knows only too well, the businesses that are closing in our CBD precinct, and particularly if I think of the Eastlands complex itself, from memory, Coles and Woolies are open, Kmart and Big W, and one or two other specialty stores. But Mr Mayor, you can throw a cricket ball through either level of that shopping centre and not hit a person. It is people are doing it tough, and I think now we need to be sending a very clear message that we are open for business. This development application went through all the correct processes, as Alderman James was very quick to point out, and I think it is important to note that through that time of that advertisement time, not one objection was received. Not one objection was received. And we are talking here from memory of over 10 metre by 7 metre sign. One only has to travel up and down Elizabeth Street, North Hobart, to look at some of these signage there, particularly above the Winston in residential North Hobart, Mount Stewart, to fully appreciate what other areas in Greater Hobart are doing to promote their businesses. So, there are no heritage values here at all. I don't think that this will detract in any way, shape or form to the amenity of the area. And it is for that reason, Mr Mayor, that I am very proud to say that I'll be supporting Alderman Pearce's alternate motion this evening.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Alderman Mulder.
Alderman Mulder, please.
Yes, I won't be supporting this particular motion, as I advised Alderman Pearce the other day when you think there's a couple of points, and I think Alderman Warren has summed them up quite well. The sign does not comply with the standards in the table, as it exceeds the prescribed height and width, and is a discretionary sign. So it doesn't matter where it is. It's just too big for what this city needs. It's to be of appropriate dimensions is also in the report, which it's not. It's too large. The signs would not involve the repetition of messages on the frontage. So the poster panel would change at a rate of 1 per 30 seconds. And you make the point about the purpose of the sign is not to distract drivers, but it's to attract them from what they should be focusing on. And at changing one every 30 seconds, people stopped at the lights are going to be looking at it. And that's one of the issues that I have. The issue with the sign is that I don't think it really is appropriate for that area. I think that a smaller and adequate sign, which the code allows for, would be most appropriate, and it could be there. I have concerns, though, about displaying images, even if the images aren't moving, but the electronic images are switching from point to point. I think the officers have done a good job here. I'm not particularly concerned that there were no representations. That is not an unusual thing, but once again, we have a planning scheme, we have a code, we have the idea that we don't want, as Alderman Warren puts it, Vegas-type billboards. There's an opportunity to create as much as the planning scheme allows, and I would welcome this matter to be appealed, and that the appropriate step would be for mediation to go through the Planning Commission, at which point we might get a more satisfactory sign. So I won't be supporting this.
Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I do appreciate everybody's perspective to date. People have raised a range of matters, and they're all worthy of consideration. And I respect the work the officers have done. But ultimately, it's kind of in our lap. And then if we look at you read recommendation 1, it will not integrate into the design of the premises or streetscape. It will dominate the streetscape, will have an unreasonable impact. That's a degree of subjectivity. It's not saying X 0.1 or it's, on Q7, it's 3 centimetres this way or that way. People are projecting that this is something that's going to stick out like a sore thumb. I don't think it will. I actually have faith in the design that came back to council maybe 5 years ago. There is an intent and a desire to extend Eastlands and to have that whole car park covered, and for that end to be a place where people, I think it was going to have a degree of eating amenity, which will hopefully come back and would have a lovely outlook over the bay. Once that component of this centre is developed, the sign is not going to be that substantive. But even if that is 10 or 15 years away, it's kind of a bit subjective as to whether its impact, and it will vary from person to person. But as has been mentioned, no representations is a very interesting point in an area where we tend to get quite a few representations. Malls aren't bulletproof. Malls aren't. We've seen lots of misery and lots of decay with some facilities, especially in the US. Don't think that just because we've known this place to be the thriving place it's been, that it can just go on. This has something that hasn't come to us before, and I suspect one of the reasons is something that was alluded to by Alderman Blomley. It is eerie to go into that facility at the moment and be using the supermarkets, and as was pointed out, probably the only other place being Kmart. We do want it to be vibrant, and for those businesses, some of them may not still be there, but if they are, they will be wanting to promote their wares, and new businesses that are in there will be wanting to do the same. And what mechanisms are there for them to do that? So this is probably going to be a tight vote, and I respect everybody's point of view to date. I'm not voting on this because I necessarily think it's it's something that I want to see occur, but I understand the rationality behind why they've come to this, and I understand the importance in this era, and in an area where, as has been written in the recommendation, a degree of subjectivity around, unreasonable and integration and all those words. It is one of those ones where we take the report, but ultimately we distill and make our own decisions. So I will be supporting Alderman Pearce's motion.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Chong. Is Alderman Chong there? You're on mute if you are.
Sorry, like Alderman Walker, I don't necessarily think this is the most beautiful sign that could be produced, but I will be supporting the motion. Two things, I guess, that lead me to that, apart from the overall business requirements, if you like, of being able to advertise in this difficult time. One is, as a number of aldermen have said, there were no representations against this, and has been commented as an area where we do get representations regularly if there are issues with it. And the other thing that came to my mind when I was considering it was the traffic, and I take heart from the fact that both council officers and the external review said that there would be no detrimental impact on the traffic. So for both of those reasons, I will be supporting the alternate motion.
Thank you. Any final speakers?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alderman Kendi.
Yes, sorry, my camera's just stuck for the moment, but anyway, you don't need to see me. As summed up perfectly by the last two speakers, this, in essence, is a shopping precinct. Now, that is where we need to be able to make sure that everything is as visible as it can possibly be. It's a shopping precinct, a retail shopping precinct. I applaud Alderman Pearce for the amount of work he's put into this, and I will be supporting the motion. It is a shopping precinct.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce, right to reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, in the research I was doing on this, Mayor, and one of the reasons why I went down and had a look at the site, because I found when I saw the officer's report, I found it rather confusing. So I went down to the site, and I wouldn't have put my name to this motion if I wasn't convinced it was the right thing to do. But in my research, Mayor, it was quite interesting to note that just in the research, roadside digital billboard signage, there is approximately 180 in locations within major cities in Australia. So what are we going to do? We're going to turn around and say, no, we don't want it. We're trying to help people in this difficult time. And as the last 2 or 3 speakers have said, Eastlands is really, really scary at the moment because things are pretty dead. So I'm saying let's support business. Let's support the big and the small businesses in Eastlands. And believe me, there's quite a lot of small businesses there that will need some help. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Voting's open for item 11.3.1 for approval. Just waiting on one more.
That would be me, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you.
Can I, if I can just add, my whole screen is frozen now.
Okay.
So
Can we take a yes or?
Yes.
Okay. Voting's closed. Motion is carried 8 votes to 4.
Thank you.
And the voting record is displayed. Okay, moving on to item 11.3.2. It's a development application at 15 Torrens Street, 12 and 14 Henry Street, Richmond for a 3-lot subdivision and boundary adjustment. I have a mover and a seconder, please.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the motion that I have circulated.
Do I have a seconder for refusal?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll second that. Alderman Warren.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley. No, sorry. Alderman James, would you speak, please?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, in our notes or in the officer's report, it refers to a number of areas, particularly in relation to clause E13.8.3. And in that, it also refers to table E13.2. Now, the table E13.2 is actually refers to, amongst other things, the statement of historic cultural heritage significance in the heritage precinct in Richmond. And it says Richmond's Tasmania's final Georgian village. And that is design, and the conservation policy says, and I quote, to enhance the historic integrity of groups of buildings and the streetscapes. Part B quote, to retain the distinctive character of Richmond, which is derived from its buildings, open space, undulating topography, market garden, historic gardens, and in particular the scale of buildings, low solid fence walls, style of buildings, building lines and building materials, and to retain the important views of the town-bound landmarks and the surrounding rural countryside. That's taken from our table E13.2 in relation to the heritage precinct in relation to Richmond. In the actual officer's report and under the clause E13.8.3, the performance criteria refers to as the overall lot sizes are less than prominent land parcels nearby, and it's detrimental to the historical cultural significance of the precinct. And it also refers to, in that same clause, E13.8.3, that and in accordance with table again E13.2 in the heritage precinct, as lots 3 and 4 have the greatest potential to impact upon the confused understanding of the precinct development. And finally, the proposal doesn't comply with E13.8.3 as the design criteria conservation policy listed in table E13.2 as the scale of the proposed lot sizes is a clear departure from this table. So we have a table which is basically policy in that sense, that it's stating that there is a certain historical integrity on the groups and buildings and what we should and should not be basically doing in relation to any departures from that. And in summary, the proposal does not comply with the planning scheme controls, and in particular clause table E13.2, and as the subdivision is unsympathetic to the historical cultural heritage significance of the precinct. I seek council support.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, in addition to the points raised by Alderman James, I have concerns over the size of lots 1 and 2, and P2 also says that the design of each lot must contain a building area able to satisfy all of the following, and one of those is that reasonably capable of accommodating residential use and development. Now, for blocks that are about 400, just slightly over 400 square metres, I think, yeah, certainly you could build something on those. But if you look at the positioning of those blocks in relation to 13 Torrens Street, it would be very difficult. And given that the land actually slopes down from 15 to 13, it would be very difficult to build something that didn't overshadow and dominate that property. So I foresee problems there in the future. I know we can't take that into account. But I think, you know, if the developers were happy to build a sort of modest one-storey cabin shielded by trees, then we might be fine. But I think there are serious concerns about subdividing to that size in that location, particularly with lots 1 and 2.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Any other speakers?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, please.
Alderman Blomley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, there's no question that Richmond is one of Australia's most authentic Georgian villages. It is unique, it is special, and I'm sure we would all agree that as council, we need to ensure that the values of the village are protected and enhanced. However, Mr. Mayor, this isn't a reason or excuse to start cherry picking or selectively quoting from the officer's report. It is clear from the officer's report, Mr. Mayor, that they recommend approval, and it is for that reason and the reasons outlined, including the conditions and advice provided in their recommendation, Mr. Mayor, that if this motion currently before the chair is lost, I will seek to move the officer's recommendation.
Thanks, Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman James.
Yes, in summary, Mr Mayor, the proposal does not comply with clause E13.8.2 and in particular the table E13.2 in the heritage precinct, and that is because it's a historic cultural area and it's going to impact on the lot sizes, will have a greatest potential to impact on the precinct development. I seek council support.
Thank you. Could I have the voting up for 11.3.2, please? Okay, so voting's open for 11.3.2 for a refusal.
Mr Mayor, I've pressed the wrong button, as they say in the classics.
You're able to change the vote right up until the point that I close it.
Okay.
You just resubmit.
Let's see how it goes.
Perfect, that worked.
Something changed.
Alderman Kendi, are you back online for voting?
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to contact the technicians, but no luck as yet. So I am not no.
You're voting no?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Voting's closed. The motion is lost. We'll just get a display of the voting there for the record. So the voting's there. The motion is lost. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second
Yeah,
that.
I'll second
Alderman Pears, I've got seconding that. Alderman Blomley.
Mr Mayor, I think that everything that needs to be said on this matter has been said, and I think it's a fine report from the officers and a solid recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Pears.
Same here, Mayor, same thing.
Other speakers?
Alderman James, I believe it's contrary to our planning scheme, in particular to the recommendation I referred to, E13.2.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right a reply, Alderman Blomley.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just commend the recommendation.
Can we have the voting box for 11.3.2 again, please?
Coming through now, Mayor.
Voting's open for 11.3.2 for approval. And Alderman Kendi, take it you're still offline and for a yes?
Yes.
Thank you, Alderman Kendi. Close the voting. The motion is carried. We'll just wait for the record.
That is through now, Mayor.
Thank you. So the voting record's there. Thank you. And moving on to item 11.3.3, a development application 9 and 11 Avenue Way, Cambridge.
I'll move the alternative motion, Mayor. My alternative motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
I'll take Alderman Blomley. I think I picked up there. So, Alderman Pears, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, we know the officer's recommendation was for approval, but what actually happened? Look, it was just a minor error.
Sorry, point of order there. I think it was for refusal.
It is for refusal.
Yeah,
It's refusal.
yeah, sorry. The officer's recommendation was for refusal, but what actually happened, it was only a minor mistake in communication. And once I pointed that out, thankfully, Mr. Lovell quickly got onto it, and I do appreciate his efforts here. So that's why I've moved the recommendation for approval, Mayor. I think it's straightforward. We did discuss if it was a setback of 5.5, it was going to be for approval anyway. So thankfully, Mr. Lovell got onto it straight away, and now I can hopefully move the recommendation. Mayor, I don't think there's a lot to say because I think it's fairly straightforward. I think the alderman that went down and had a look at the site would totally agree. It's really a good development. Now a minor error has been corrected. I certainly recommend approval of this.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I just thank Alderman Pearce for taking the lead on this and doing all the work that he's done over the last a few days. Like many colleagues, I spoke with the proponents over the course of the weekend. This is a common sense, good outcome. I'd like to congratulate and acknowledge Mr. Lovell and his planning staff. It was proactive, a responsible response. We're now sending a very clear message that we're a serious organisation that will, when we ball things up, we'll take it on the chin and we'll work with business to let them do what they do best. So overall, I think it's a great outcome all around.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Alderman James, a question to Mr. Lovell first up. Mr. Lovell, before the submission to the TPC regarding the 5.5 metre setback, what is the current situation in relation to that? Is it still as we have been dealing with it on other applications prior to the developer who submitted to the TPC for the 5.5? What was the setback in relation to this area, particularly in Kennedy Drive and near Abernant Way, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, currently the acceptable solution is 10 metres.
Yep.
But there's a discretion to reduce. The status of the amendment is that the panel hearing has been completed, and all indications are that it will be supported as adopted by the council, which would reduce the acceptable solution down to the 5.5.
Look, thanks for that, Mr. Lovell, because over the course of events, we've always had this consideration of 10 metres, and a lot of those developers, in good faith, have gone ahead and obviously had the setback of 10 metres and abided by Clarence interim planning scheme for that area. Notwithstanding that there's an application before the TPC, they may, I would submit, wonder as to why a 5.5 metre is now being considered by a developer when in actual fact the 10 metres is still in place. And given that the 10 metres has been sort of the benchmark on which other developers have contended, and now a developer has submitted to the TPC, and as you said, it's under consideration, it just makes you wonder as to whether the TPC will say, well, hang on a bit, the Clarence interim planning scheme said 10 metres. Now we have a developer who is obviously putting in, as he has every right to do, seeking a 5.5. The second point I want to make is that the officer's recommendation in A1 referred to clause F15.7.2.1 as the proposal is not compatible with the scale of nearby buildings and represents an overdevelopment of the site. So this particular motion that the officers have put up is in two parts. Okay, it's been identified in part 2 as the proposal does not comply with that clause, as it does not provide landscaping for the area within. Okay, that's now being suggested it's being 5.5. But that's part two of the motion. And in Alderman Pears's motion, he hasn't even addressed the question in relation to clause F15 7.2.1p1, as it's not compatible with the scale of nearby buildings and represents an overdevelopment of the site. So it's okay if you want to go and use the words picking winners. The simple fact of the matter is it falls over on two parts. Firstly, it's not compatible with the scale of nearby buildings and represents an overdevelopment. And also, we're on the sort of premonition that the TPC will say yes to 5.5. And therefore, if they do say, then this particular application may get the tick in the box. That's all uncharted territory, I submit, Mr. Chairman, and therefore I will not support this change, and I will, in fact, support the officer's recommendation if the numbers are there for that to go ahead and be debated.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder.
Yes, just for the public record, because anyone who is watching this, or sorry, who will be watching the replay tomorrow, probably is quite confused about what the error was that was picked up and the implications of it. So just for the public record, when it comes time for summing up in debate, I would like the mover of the motion to actually address those issues and just point out to us what the error was in the officer's report that enabled him to move this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Pears. If you're trying to talk, you're on mute, Alderman Pears.
Thank you. One thing amazed me is certain aldermen said it's not compatible with the buildings next to it. There's no buildings anywhere. The buildings are a long way away from it. This area has only been just developed, and I'm surprised to hear that comment. To Alderman Mulder, the staff, well, I don't want to say too much, but the staff of the development architects were going on 10-metre side setback. They were going on 10 metres, and they got a bit confused with what council wanted and what they should have, and that was the only reason. When I found out and they phoned Mr. Lovell, it was totally different. We got things moving. Even the applicant said, look, he didn't realise that the architects had made a mistake there, so that's why it was rectified very quickly. Other than that, Mayor, I went down there, I thought, why would this be refused? And I'm really pleased that hopefully tonight it will get up, because I really think it's a very stable development, very good development.
Thank you. Can we have the voting box for 11.3.3, please?
Mayor, before we do that, just a point of clarification. I'm still not sure. The officer's report says a 4.5 metre setback. The proposed changes to the scheme say a 5.5 metre setback. To me, it's still outside the proposed view zone.
Look, this is slightly non-standard procedure, I guess, but in the interests of clarity, Mr. Lovell, could you explain what Alderman Mulder is questioning here, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the acceptable solution under the scheme as it is now is 10 metres and may be reduced. In considering how far to reduce it, there are a number of streetscape factors to take into account. As it was proposed, as in the application, it was 4.5 metres. At the same time, an amendment to the scheme is going through, which the council supported not very long ago, which will reduce the standard setback from 10 metres to 5.5. I guess that the reason why reducing it to 5.5 may be satisfactory is, I guess we took the view that the tribunal might find it somewhat cavalier of the council to not support what will be the new acceptable solution, and an acceptable solution which is consistent with the state planning provisions which are coming in. I'm not sure. I hope that explains it satisfactorily.
Mr. Lovell, is it correct that the applicant has now amended the application to seek a 5.5 variation as opposed to a 4.5 variation?
To you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. We received a email today confirming that the applicant wished to increase the setback to 5.5 metres.
Thank you.
That was the point that I wished to make.
Thank you. Look, we've had the right of reply. Voting is open on 11.3.3 for approval.
Good job, Alderman Pearce.
Look, Alderman James, could you please not intrude in the process? Your mic is on and your side comments are coming through. Alderman Kennedy, do we have you online for voting yet, please? I think unless you're muted, we'll have to assume that you're having trouble with the machine. So I'll close the vote.
It's okay. Sorry, just all I have on my screen at the moment is 11.3.2 as far as voting. So I will have to once again vote. If that, maybe we can get that updated on my screen because I had to reboot. So I will be supporting the approval. Yes.
Thank you very much. So voting's closed, and the motion is carried. If we could have the result there, please.
That is 10 votes for with 2 against, Mayor.
And the record is there. Okay. 11.3.4 is a development application at 1 Cremorne Avenue, Cremorne for 3 multiple dwellings. The recommendation for approval. Can I have a move and a seconder, please?
Mr. Mayor, I will move that the 11.3.4 development application 1 Cremorne Avenue, Cremorne be refused for the following reasons as listed on the notice paper.
Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Alderman James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proposal does not comply with the Village Zone Clause 16.4.2 and obviously performance criteria 2A3, as it will cause an unreasonable adverse impact on the residential amenity of the adjoining lots by the visual impact when viewed from adjoining lots through the building bulk and massing. Also, the Clarence Interim Planning Scheme, and in particular the village zone, and there is a reference there to clause 16.4.2, that as reduction in the building rear and side setbacks, and that obviously is what is being sought, will cause unreasonable adverse impacts on the adjoining dwelling. There were a number of representations received in relation to this from the community, and also in Mr. Mark Hand's letter, which was read earlier, he referred to the nature of the low density and development that really ought to happen in relation to this, and also under the LPS, hopefully there will be consideration given to this when it obviously comes before the TPC. What's interesting about this development, there's no other development in Cremorne that is of a 3-storey conjoined and 3 conjoined 3-storey dwellings. There's no other building. There are single and 2-storey dwellings throughout and along both sides of Frederick Henry Parade, but there's no other development of this size scale. And it is interesting to note that the proposed building footprint covers 46% of the lot. The density is significantly greater than what is the average density at 25%. Also, the fact that the setbacks of the west and also to the north is proposed to be 2.1 metres, which is less than the minimum of 4 metres, which is part of our planning scheme. And the setback to the north is 1.5 metres less than the minimum required of 4 metres. So what the proposal is doing, it's seeking reduction in building setbacks that will have an unreasonable adverse impact on the adjoining dwelling and residential village amenity of Cremorne. This particular proposal is at 1 Cremorne Avenue. It's on the corner of a very busy intersection. It's opposite Council's park and also one of the main access to the beach. Its prominence, in fact, and the impact it's going to impose, not only on number 1, which is the immediate property next door, but also at number 3, and also the number of people that have actually sought to put in a representation in contrary to what this particular developer is hoping to achieve. It has also been mentioned in Mr. Hand's proposal, which was addressed to the council earlier, that they would propose, and it would be suitable, to have some sort of development that had been approved by council back in 2018, I think, which was that 34 to 36, I think, Esplanade, Frederick Henry Esplanade. And that, as we all know, has been built and subsequently sold. And therefore there has been a comment by Mr. Bennett, who in his deputation referred to something of that nature that he would, and I think a number of other residents would support in relation to this. In summary, it's got the bulk, it's got the mass, it doesn't obviously meet the footprint or the density requirement in relation to the Cremorne village area. The setbacks have been reduced substantially, as I mentioned, proposed to be 2.1, whereas the minimum, that's in the west setback, is 4 metres, and the setback to the north is 1.5 less than the required 4 metres. You've got a huge building on a small footprint, which really is going to be quite prominent and impact upon the amenity of Cremorne. I seek council support.
Thank you, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, look, I endorse what Alderman James has said. For context, there was a similar development proposed, a larger development proposed some years ago, which went all the way through to the Supreme Court and lost on appeal, which the council rejected. And I don't believe that the issues raised in the past have been sufficiently addressed, particularly around Borewater and the repurposed Western Wall. So I do have concerns about this proposal, but I was also really interested in the previous conversation around 11.3.3, where the majority of aldermen were comfortable to vote taking into account the proposed planning scheme rather than the current planning scheme. And the proposed planning scheme for this area is low density, and we've been told that this proposal would not comply with that addition to the planning scheme. So I hope that we can take the same pragmatic approach here and not endorse something that is going to be very much out of place and spoil the character of the area. I seek council support.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Other speakers? In that case,
look, I might chime in as well. I think if that's all right, Mr. Mayor. I lost
Alderman Walker, sure.
It is a different development technically to what was before there, and the one that before there has been mentioned, the fact that it was rejected at every stage of appeal, starting at the council and moving up. But we're dealing with what's before us today. I have found the comments around another development, the two-storey development, sort of being a precedent, an interesting one, because this is three. This is not like something I'm familiar of in the area. Comments have been put in relation to its compatibility with a new planning scheme or zoning sort for that area, and that should be dwelled upon. Visual bulk is an issue that comes to us from time to time as a planning authority, and normally when we're concerned about it, it's because we're dealing with developments on significantly steep slopes, and that sort of will lend to things getting scaled up. But the visual bulk here is substantive, as has been one of the reasons put forward in the rejection. And this is visual bulk occurring on effectively a dead flat piece of land. And this is where setbacks really do come into it. When things are so tall and so substantive, the lack of setback just really magnifies and resonates things. Alderman Warren alluded to some issues around the bore water issue. I mean, there are water issues in general in that area, and I know that is something that's not necessarily totally touched on in the report, but I do note the submission around the neighbouring bore. So I have some discomfort around the officer's recommendation, and I've reflected on that. I've reflected with the limit of discretion that we have, and I believe within that scope that it is appropriate to actually fall in behind the recommendation that is being tabled by Alderman James, and that is my intent on how I will vote.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I won't be supporting this, the motion currently before the chair. A great deal of work has occurred here, both from the proponent, but also from at an officer level as well. It is a comprehensive report. It does, in the considered opinion of the experts, meet the standards of the scheme, and it is for that reason it has been recommended for approval. So, Mr. Mayor, if the motion before the chair is lost, I will foreshadow that I will move the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman James.
Yes, in summary, as I mentioned earlier, and also from the number of representations, there were 14 against and 6 in support, and a lot of those representatives did in fact raise valid concerns about the amenity of the village and trying to keep it within that sort of style and sort of nature coastal village as it is. The development in summary is 3 conjoined 3-storey dwellings, and obviously they are seeking to have the building footprint obviously covering more than the lot that's in, obviously contrary to the 25% that's currently in the Cremorne area. Also, they're seeking quite substantial setbacks as proposed from, 2.1 less than the minimum 4 metres, and obviously the northern setback will be 1.5 less than the 4 metres. It's seeking a reduction in the building setbacks, and it will have an unreasonable adverse impacts on the adjoining dwelling. It was also mentioned that the matter of the low density zoning that is currently being applied to the, obviously going to be submitted to the TPC is a factor that hasn't been dealt with yet. But nevertheless, the question in relation to whether this particular development meets the conditions of the Clarence Interim Planning Scheme, as we find at the moment, it does not, and therefore I seek council's support, and the motion is obviously to refuse it on the grounds that I've already referred to. The bulk, mass, the setbacks do not apply, and also the density requirement, it does not meet the conditions of Clarence Interim Planning Scheme 2015.
Okay, so voting open on 11.3.4 for refusal.
Mayor, we have 11
Alderman
responses, 12 responses.
Alderman Kennedy, are you online yet?
I think so.
We have
Okay,
12,
we have 12 responses.
Mayor.
Voting's closed.
So there's 8 votes to 4, and the alternative motion is carried. Mayor?
Okay, so the motion is carried, and the voting record is there. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Next item on the agenda is 11.5.1 under asset management. The recommendation is that council adopts the Brinktop Bushland Reserve Activity Plan for 2020 to 2030. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Alderman Warren moved.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Moved it.
Thank you.
Alderman Chong, seconded.
Thank you, second, Alderman Chong. Alderman Warren, you have the floor.
Just as per the officer's recommendation, thank you.
Alderman Chong.
Just very briefly like to pass on the thanks of a number of the people who went on the walk and talk and were very impressed with the level of community consultation that was undertaken with the plan.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Yes, Alderman Jones, just a question, and again, I will be supporting this because I think it's long overdue, and what we're locking into place is that reserve activity plan, which the officers have gone into great detail, etc. But 2 questions. Firstly, and I did raise this the other day at the briefing in relation to the walkway from Richmond proper up to Brinktop, and my question through you to Mr. Graham in his capacity as the manager of asset management. Mr. Graham, how far advanced are we with council obviously taking over, or obviously putting into its asset base, if you want to call it that, the footpath, and obviously it has been a factor in relation to the development that abuts it. Can you just provide an update in relation to that pathway and when we will have handover takeover, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as part of the subdivision, the Davids Way track corridor was handed over to council through a public right-of-way, and it has been our track to manage for a while now.
So in fact, it's now council's, and we have obviously the job, Mr. Graham, to maintain it and look after it in the interest of the community. Is that right?
That is correct, Alderman James.
And another question, a very brief one. There's been a lot of rubbish, and also it's been used in places at times as a tip. What sort of measures, and I know it may fall, it should fall within the Brinktop Bushland Reserve Activity Plan. What sort of proposal do we have? Is it part of council's ranger, sort of surveillance, if you call it that, to regularly maintain and keep up to date with that, because it has been up to very recently been tyres dumping and everything else that seems to be a discard from passers-by, or even I might add from the community. Could you just give us an update on that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we do receive advice at time of dumping in that area, but also the EPA have released their notice of dumping material, rubbish being around, where we will receive information on where we should attend promptly, and we can monitor this as the EPA is in terms of whether there should be cameras or other things installed to monitor illegal dumping if it's becoming more prominent in an area.
Thank you. I'll support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right of reply then, Alderman Warren?
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
We'll get the box up for 11.5.1 for approval to adopt the plan. All those in favour, or against, or abstain? Voting's closed. It's carried unanimously. We just get the record up.
Don't need to.
That's true. Let's move on. Well said. The next item on the agenda is 11.7.1, Clarence Keep Connected Initiative update.
I'd like to move an alternate motion on that one, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder, please?
Can we have it up there on the screen, please, first?
The alternative motion is now on the screen. Do we have a seconder?
Alderman Moulder, yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I mean, first of all, I know at this day and age it's very difficult to know exactly how to respond to these situations and what is the right communication, how to do it, what to say, how often to say, those sort of things. And I see no intentions or motivations for what we've gone about with here. Community consultation is important, and I think we need to consider this whole process. But really, the issue here is that we signed across with previous motions to give the mayor and deputy mayor and GM the opportunity to spend money on things that we thought we needed to deal with community issues in relation to all of this. But we also have an obligation to make sure that we as fellow aldermen get a chance to look at that spending and see whether it's actually been valuable or worthwhile and contributed something positively to the whole situation. And I think I certainly don't think the expenditure and the information obtained has really been worth the money, to be honest. When I first saw the signs go up, my first reaction was, well, what's this all about? It really didn't tell me much on the signs, and I was a bit confused about what they were trying to achieve. And the feedback I got from many ratepayers was exactly the same thing. Certainly we need communication, but I mean, when you think about it at the moment, we've got every level of government putting out daily briefings. We've got state government, federal government. And to be honest, the issues that we were dealing with in the first 3 or 4 weeks were outside of our control and were more to do with life and death situations in terms of how it all started and where it went from there. And I mean, my feelings were that if the community had some issues that they wanted to talk to us about, they would have reached out and told us. And, and the issue that I think is that, the consultation that we need to have is down the track in relation to how we rebuild and how we support our community after we know exactly what we're able to do. And I mean, look, I think, the report itself really, didn't tell us anything we didn't already know, to be honest. There's plenty of communication channels we've got available to us all. I mean, the aldermen are elected by the community to pass on community concerns and get involved in, being as a conduit for information. We've got Facebook, we've got websites, we've got Your Say, people can call the office. There's email, there's senior managers, the staff are also getting feedback from people all over the place as well. And I mean, the information, there's plenty of information out there. To go and spend more money, I think, really didn't achieve a lot, as I've already said. I mean, the summary, to be honest, it took 9 pages to tell us something that should have taken about 2, to be honest. It was, it was a bit ambiguous in terms of, there was 28 people that were involved, and then the next minute it said 33. And I mean that, when you look at the expenditure there, which included, $7,000 plus, another $1,500 for the Eastern Shore Sun ad, which wasn't included in the report, plus staff time, so around $8,500 for staff time, works out to be just under $300 per piece of feedback. And I mean, if the pubs were open and we could have a pub test at the moment, I don't think that one had passed the pub test. So, I'm really concerned that, it's done now and we can't do much about but, we're really in a situation now where we need to look at all of our costs, and rather than repurpose, existing budgets and be so willing to spend it, I think it's really important that we send a message to the community and as aldermen have the opportunity to sit down and actually decide what are our core and essential services and get the opportunity to do that. And I felt that it was inappropriate to spend that money before we had a chance to consider those issues. And I mean, look, it's other people's money. That's what we've got to remember. Rather than be repurposing funding, we should be looking at saving it at the moment. I mean, I noticed in the paper today with Hobart, they're talking about a $20 million, reduction in revenue. And I mean, while $8,500 might not seem a lot, but we're going to have to be making $8,500 decisions every 5 minutes in a couple of weeks' time when it comes to budget, and all of these things add up. I think we need to make some serious decisions in relation to what we are going to spend money on, and I think at the moment, just to be able to note the report. And I was an interesting comment that came out today too from Alderman von Berto in relation to another committee that's being set up in relation to more communication from a community recovery fund, which probably may be more determined to sort of at least raise this issue, because that's another government body looking at spending ratepayers' money on communication without us having an opportunity to know what's involved in that space. And I mean, once again, the intentions are probably honourable, but we've really got to, tighten our belt, carefully consider all the things that we're doing. And, we have a responsibility to check these things.
Alderman Newington. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just reiterate some of the things, but the key thing with this one is each of the councils are now in this space. The state government is calling for volunteers as a result of an email we got today. Volunteering Tasmania, I heard them the other day on the news saying they were confused because there were too many volunteers and no coordination of those volunteers. Now we're talking about
Lost you.
Alderman Mulder, we've lost your audio.
Am I back now?
Yes.
Yes.
The software is not bulletproof, is it?
No.
We've got there's no coordination, and we are bombarded by communications at the moment. In fact, when my email lights up now, I actually only listen to what the Premier's got to say every morning and the Chief Health Officer, and that's the only place I'm getting my advice, because that way I know it's consistent. And I think there's a lot of people out there now who, the moment they will see the word COVID-19 in some email or thing, just turn off. They know what they have to do, and they know what we have to do. We've also got the community themselves looking after their neighbours, which is a really great way of building the social cohesion that we're going to need afterwards. Then you've got the issue of, even Gumtree is out there doing these sorts of things. Now, the thing with the volunteers is they've all got, before we put anyone out there, we should be ensuring that they're going through the standard COVID-19 training package that's available to all people who are in positions where they're going to be meeting other people, as these volunteers would do. So I really think it's about time, at the local council level, we took a bit of a back seat and supported the messages, not repeat them and not go off on our own. Now, if the state government is going up a volunteer program, then that should be the way in which it's coordinated with a single list. So I'm also concerned about these things. I know these are difficult times and we don't have time to discuss this as council, but before these things are dropped on us. So I would, like to see this go to a workshop and that we have some discussion around this thing, because what we're doing is actually duplicating the work of others.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess to fill in a bit of background, perhaps, when we first started this process, it was as an immediate response, because at that point, we didn't know whether we would be able to get printed the next week. We didn't know what kind of lockdown situation we were going into. And the leadership team was very concerned that we couldn't get anything out to our ratepayers if we didn't talk to them really quickly. And we were also very concerned that we didn't only want to rely on the website and electronic media, because we know that throughout Clarence we have a number of ratepayers and community that don't have access to the internet. So we tried to find a way that would actually utilise various means of communication, just to let people know that just because we were closing council didn't mean that we'd all disappeared off the face of the earth, and to find out for those who wanted to tell us what they thought the impact of the coronavirus was in the short and medium term. Yes, we're getting some responses back. I mean, apart from dog surveys, do we get heaps of responses to any surveys we do? No, often we don't. But we do get anecdotal information. And interestingly, as has been mentioned, out of those responses we did get, a number of people have volunteered and are actually joining council's volunteer support group, which is great because we always need more volunteers. Let's be realistic about this. At the end of the day, this particular project was never intended to go on open-ended. It's a way of finding out information from the community and a way of contacting and communicating with the community. The intention has always been to draw a line somewhere in the next week or so, analyse all the information that we get, both through your say, the telephones, and from talking with our partner organisations in the community, and then use that to feed back into a workshop. It's never been designed to be just a, in a vacuum. I think it's great to bring it to a workshop. I think it's really important that it feeds into how we as a council make deliberations on what we do in the future.
Thanks, Alderman Chong. Other speakers, please.
Yeah, Alderman James, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I'm supportive of Alderman Ewington's, and I haven't got up on the screen at the moment, but if we could have it up there, please, in relation to the two parts. And thank you. The council suspends any new spending on this program. Now, I think that is where we have to go in relation to this leadership team. And I've heard a lot of hot words come out of one or two people in relation to the leadership team. And I referred to it as a clandestine group on Friday's briefing. And I stand by that because this group of individuals includes the mayor, the deputy mayor, the general manager, and key council officers from the community, cultural and strategic development teams.
I need to correct you there, Alderman James. It only comprises the mayor, general manager, mayor, deputy mayor and general manager. Other officers are called in from time to time on particular items to provide briefings, but the leadership team only comprises 3 people.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, perhaps we can amend on page 174, 1.2, Mr. Mayor, and reflect that comment that you've just made, because the way it reads at the moment is, and I've just said, and I'll repeat, the deputy mayor and key council officers from community, etc. So I would have thought that there will be a correction to that.
The other point of order, Mr. Mayor, that's a total and absolute misquote of 1.2 on page 174, an absolute total misrepresentation.
Oh, look,
right.
It's there.
We'll take us that, Alderman James. I've picked up on that point. I think it's important we get on with the debate. So
yes,
please do so.
More than happy, Mr. Mayor. Look,
Yeah, but truthful.
Alderman Blomley, please.
Thanks. I appreciate all that, Alderman Blomley. Part B, council suspends any new spending on this program, and in fact that is quite right. We've spent what, $7,000, and I think Alderman, well, thereabouts, on page 178, and another 1,500 which came to light on Friday.
Alderman James, I just need to make a point of clarification there as well. That 1,500 in East Shore Sun was a general communication to the community, which involved a number of points from our previous council meeting. There was one paragraph in that out of a number of paragraphs that actually referred to a Clarence Connected program. So it would be absolutely disingenuous to attribute that whole advertisement to this program.
Yes, but it's summarised under this program that we're discussing at the moment, Mr. Mayor. So whether you want to say it's not included in the 7,000 and it's really 8 and a bit, then really, I think that you're not really telling the full story. With respect to calls for a council workshop to consider, I agree with it. I think we need to do that, and I'm glad that in fact the core projects, which I know Alderman Ewington and many of us as well have been really pursuing this. The last point on there is the one that I have a little bit of concern about, and if we could put it back up on the screen, because for all and sundry to see it so I can speak to it, and I know my timing is running out. If we could have that back, please, Mr. Nelson. Reduce council expenditure as part of our response to the reduction in revenue expected as part of the current COVID-19 impacts. Alderman Ewington, I think that is an open statement. It could, in fact, and we may have to come back and revoke this part of the motion because it's saying reduce expenditure on the revenue expected because of COVID-19 impacts. We may need to spend a little bit more money. We may need to reduce, look at the reduction in revenue. And already we have signalled what it's going to impact on our 10-year plan. So look, I really don't want to lock myself in to part two, because I think it's shutting the door on what we may have to contribute in the way of being a partner with the other councils and the community in general, when we are saying here in this motion that part two is basically responding to revenue, and therefore there's going to be a reduction in expenditure. If that was sort of reworked so as to say that we would investigate any proposal that comes forward in relation to what we may do as community-minded organisation for the COVID-19 impacts, then that would be great. I would like very much, Mr. Chairman and Alderman Ewington and my colleagues, to support this A, B and C, but I have reservations about 2, because I think it's going to lock us in, and we may need to open our arms and basically help out some members of the community as part of the networking with other councils. I'm in a position where I want to support the motion, but I feel that it's going to lock us out in relation to part 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers?
Mayor, I totally agree with this motion. I'm not quite sure what Alderman James is so worried about part 2 for, because I think it's quite valid to be in there, and I think this coming to a workshop. We've got to really seriously look at expenditure, and this is one way we can do it, so all aldermen have got to say. I totally support the recommendation, Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers?
Yeah, I'll...
Alderman Walker, yep.
Yep. Look, thanks. I've noted what Alderman James has said, Mr. Mayor, and I think what he's trying to say is he's all up for some areas really getting a reduction in expenditure if prudent, but there may be other areas, possibly in asset management or something, that it may be appropriate to increase it. I think that was the spirit of the point that Alderman James was getting at. And taking that spirit on board, I'd like to propose an amendment to C.2 to change the word reduce to target. So I'm wondering if the mover and seconder of the motion would be amenable to C.2 changing from reduce to target, on the basis that this is still allowing a Herculean effort and a reduction to occur, but if that's not viable, not getting ourselves too painted into a corner.
Alderman Ewington?
Look, to be honest, I don't think that's really necessary, to be honest, because I mean, I'm not actually saying...
At this stage, it's procedural, yes or no?
No.
Well, okay, well, that's the end of that. Back to you, Walker.
Okay, well, no, look, I point that on, and I do understand the strength and convictions of how Alderman Ewington has constructed this, and the spirit of really trying to get out of some cognitive dissonance around this is situation normal, that we just do the usual Clarence special, and if we get an underspend, we reallocate it to something else. Underspends, if they occur, are probably more than not to be used as rollovers for they're effectively the hay in the barn because winter is coming. This is a profound challenge that is facing, so we can't stress that enough. And by the end of it, you're going to get so sick of the cliche of it being a marathon, not a sprint. sprint. You're going to get tired of the line that's been used, not just by me, but other aldermen. But it is in all this council's time. We are elected during what is probably the most significant challenge since World War II. And it isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant. And if none of us are returned in 2 years' time, if we can all look back and say we really did the right thing to preserve the core of this wonderful community and move forward, then I think we can be proud. So even with the amendment not accepted, I will be backing the motion, and we'll deal with any potential constraints or challenges that it has as it goes along. It's not saying the Facebook, the Keep Clarence Connected stuff has to be put on a fire and burned. It's simply saying that the funding way it's happened will not continue. But it's also signalling that at the end of the day, there's 12 aldermen. Some are in higher positions in the leadership team, others might not be, but we're all accountable to the community. And at the end of the day, we listen and we receive advice from staff, but we're the ones that are making the decisions. Now, we don't want to get down to the number of paper clips that can be ordered in the stationary cabinet, but in all seriousness, this Clarence Connected project, I mean, the first I became aware of it was when corflutes were probably erected on the building I was working at without permission. A bit cute, talking about the car park. It was a feeling of it just running away. And ultimately, the buck stops with us, the community hire and fire us. We've got a profound challenge, and we need to get on with it. And I think the spirit of what this motion does telegraphs that profound challenge that's before us.
Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Warren?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, in case the opportunity doesn't arise, I'd like to commend Alderman Chong and the leadership team and the officers who put this together in a very short time as a quick response. I can imagine the sort of flack that we would have received if council had been silent during that period, if we hadn't reached out to our community. It would have been, where are they? Why aren't they talking to us? So you can't win either way. $7,000 is obviously a lot of money to anyone who's doing it tough at the moment. But in the greater council budget, well, I mean, let's be honest, it's just a few hot dinners and nothing compared to the budget submissions of some of the committees of the aldermen sitting around this screen rather than this table at the moment. It's not a significant amount of money in council's budget. We spend money on other things that could also be reviewed. I commend the team for making this quick response, and I think that, it's very easy to judge in hindsight. I recall seeing an email saying that they were looking for corflutes, and I presume everybody else received that as well. So there was some information going out that this was happening. I don't have a problem with the way that it was done. Everybody can do it better in hindsight, but I think that we just accept the report and move on. So I won't be supporting this motion.
Thanks, Alderman Warren. Alderman Edmonds.
Hello. Just picking up off Alderman Warren's comments. I don't think anyone doubts this was set up with the best intentions in a pretty rapidly changing landscape. I mean, at one point we were talking about having to delegate a lot more. But now the dust is settling. I think this program is sort of caught in the crossfire a bit of the sort of underlying feeling that many of us have of having sort of lost control of how the council's money is being spent and saved. I think, at a time like this, when you ask people what they want, they're going to say they want more. I've filled my green bin for the first time in 2 years, and I could fill it again tomorrow. But that doesn't mean we need to have extra green bin services at a time when we need to be saving money, not spending it. So far, all I've seen at our workshops and in our papers is talk of adding services. We need to be making tough decisions and to avoid the rate blowouts that have been sort of flagged with us. It's not business as usual. And I'd pick up on Alderman Warren's comments about people being on committees that have proposed spending. Well, no one's been given a chance to suggest any savings yet. We were locked out over Easter. Some people tried to bring it up last week and were shut down, and all we were fed was more spending. So, it's pretty frustrating. We've had a huge blow to our budget. I've got concerns about the words repurposing of existing budgets, etc. I think that's entirely the wrong attitude to have at a time like now when our revenues, however you want to say it, are going through the floor. I thank Alderman Ewington for picking up on that in the motion. I really like the element of a strategic review. I think Alderman Walker said it. We're the ones who'll be held to account on this. And, I was listening to some Grinspoon yesterday and, the song Lost Control really came through to me. I feel like we have lost control, and the best way to get it back is at the workshop which Alderman Ewington proposed. I really support it because, look, we all want to look like great blokes or great people in the community and, back all these programs. And I notice we're all starting to get lobbied about fitness in the park, etc. at the moment. I mean, but for crying out loud, our money's going through the floor. We've seen the modelling. If anyone wants to just continue with business as usual and new programs to spend more money at this sort of time, I just think they've got rocks in their head. We've got to get it under control so that people like some of our children aren't paying 5% after 5% on their rates because we were too gutless to make a few relatively easy calls this year.
Thanks, Alderman Edmonds. Other speakers?
Spot on, Luke.
Please, no interruptions. You get your line to reply a little bit later, Alderman Ewington. Are there any other speakers, please?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak.
Thanks, Alderman von Berto.
Thank you. Obviously, Alderman Ewington referred to the email that I sent to him responding to his suggested alternative motion. Before I do speak, I'd actually, through you, Mr Mayor, like to ask the General Manager to give us a short overview of the state recovery program that's being led by the Director of Local Government, Craig Limpkin, and the Southern Regional Social Recovery Committee that actually links into that state recovery program, because I think that might help to explain some of the comments that I made in my email. So I would like the General Manager to actually give us an overview before I speak. Thank you.
Alderman von Berto, I'm a bit reluctant to go down that path because both those summaries could take some time, and it's more appropriate at a workshop we detail those briefings. I wonder if you're able to snapshot them as part of your contribution to the debate, please. I'm familiar with both those reports and they are quite lengthy, and I'm not sure that it fits into the debate as such, even though some of the material in those reports is relevant. If you've read them, could you snapshot them within the 5 minutes, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I actually disagree with you in terms of that they are relevant to this discussion. However, I'll go through my concerns. At the moment, I have concerns in relation to Part B because it's not clear to me. I believe it'll leave us all guessing, particularly the senior staff, if we pass this motion. I'd like Alderman Ewington, in his right of reply, to explain to us what do you mean by suspends, and also what do you mean by any new spending? Until when will we be suspending the Clarence Keep Connected spending? And what do you mean by new spending? Is this no new spending of unbudgeted funds? And I think it's important in asking that question that Council on the 6th of April actually gave the General Manager the authority to expend funds in addition to the 2019-20 estimates to continue to address this pandemic crisis? Or is it spending of unspent funds in the current budget estimates? So those questions answered for me. And if passed, I want to know whether or not this motion will hamper the deliberations of Clarence City Council that's already been undertaken in that particular committee, the Southern Regional Social Recovery Committee, as part of the State Recovery Program that's being headed by Craig Limpkin, the Director of Local Government. It's not about that particular program and the Southern Regional Committee actually expending Clarence ratepayers' funds. It's about us feeding up the issues from our community to the State Recovery Program. And then for the State Recovery Program to be able to support us in various ways, shapes and means. I actually feel that Part C of the motion is, in essence, not necessary because we already have programmed workshops on the 4th and the 11th of May, which will inform the deliberations that we are going to undertake in relation to the budget. I actually see that Clarence Keep Connected may well morph into a longer term program. With this crisis, the community services that we have now are going to be far more important into the future than they've ever been. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Newington.
Right, first of all, I'll address the issue about that Alderman James raised there about reduced council expenditure. Well, I mean, yes, I firmly believe that we do need to reduce council expenditure, and I think as Alderman Edmund said, if we don't think that's the case, well, we've got rocks in our head. But this motion does not lock us into doing anything other than saying, hang on, guys, just hold on there, stop repurposing, stop moving budget money around, give us a chance to consider exactly where we're at, look at the budget, have a workshop and decide exactly which way we want to go on this. Now, in relation to the questions that Alderman Warren raised, I mean, 7,000, it's very easy for some people out there that have never been in business. You know, I mean, $7,000 is a lot of money. And it's not just one decision here. It's not only this money that we spent, it's the other consideration that I'm really interested in is that staff time that's gone into it. Is that the best way of us allocating those resources? And I personally don't believe that it is. But until we have an opportunity to sit down in a workshop and decide all those sorts of things, we don't know. And I mean, and that's the important thing, you know. The reality is too, guys, government can't fix it. We can't fix all these issues that people are raising that they've brought up even in the feedback that's in the report. You know, our role in local government, it's not to duplicate, and we keep wanting to duplicate what state government do and what federal government do, all with other people's money all of the time and expect them to pay back over the next 10 years. You know, we need to just take a break, you know, and think about what we can actually do to fix that. And that is, you know, in our role in terms of, you know, development and making it easy for business to do what they do. And I mean, tonight we had a couple of classic examples with Eastlands, you know, I mean, let them put a sign up, let them encourage businesses to reopen, let them get in there, let them start employing people, let people getting back in and have, that's the single best thing we can do for a lot of people out there that feel isolated, who feel out of control, who have got money issues, who are stressed, is to allow business to do what they do. And, you know, it's not running fancy marketing campaigns or communication, you know, ideas and you know, I mean, like I said, all the stuff that came out of that consultation was stuff that we should have already known. And to suggest that that campaign led to another person, the only way that person would have got into volunteering was because they saw the Clarence Keep Connected signs, you know, I just can't, you know, I certainly can't accept that. I mean, you know, as I think someone else mentioned, you know, there's plenty of other, you know, volunteers are saying that they're getting confused because there's too many mixed messages out there. You know, I mean, and in relation to Alderman Von Berto's questions about, you know, I mean, look, yeah, there's some confusion out there, but there's some confusion amongst some of our aldermen about what we are happy with to see the council go in this space from a budget perspective. Now, I think it's more important that we say, hang on a minute, take a break, let us go through the process of having a workshop on this stuff and clarify it all. I mean, to say that we shouldn't have a motion like that in there.
Thanks, Alderman Newington. So the voting's open on Alderman Newington's alternative motion, 11.7.1. Please submit your vote. I need one more vote.
Sorry, I was on mute. The items up the chat further say item, 8.1 point whatever, and then it says alternative motion under them, whereas this one just has the number.
This is the alternative motion for 11.7.1 that we're voting on.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. As long as it's said out loud, that's cool with me.
The motion is carried. I'll just get the record up. Don't seem to be coming through there.
Owen's just working on it at the moment.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay. Right, moving on to item 11.7.2, Community Grants Program. Understand there's a fair bit of interest in doing some more work in a workshop here, and there's some interest in a procedural motion to defer it. Alderman Walker, did you want to go ahead in that regard?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move a procedural motion that we suspend this item for up to 2 meetings, for up to 2 meetings, in order to determine a prudent response.
I think Alderman Chong suggested a second there.
Yep, I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, being a procedural motion, can I have a voting block, please, for the procedural motion that we defer this to a workshop for up to 2 council meetings?
We're just preparing that now, Mayor. Just give me a moment.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a procedural motion to defer. Voting's open. The motion is carried. So while that's sorting itself out, we'll move on to 11.7.3. which is a motion to note the General Manager's responses and his status report from COVID-19. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Alderman Warren to move.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please?
I can second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Chong. Alderman Warren, would you like to speak to the report, please?
No, just as per the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Chong.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other speakers?
Alderman James, just a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
In relation to page 193, 7.1, it refers to the following additional expenditure has occurred. Is that include staff time, or is that lumped in to those figures in the 2 dot points? Mr. Nelson, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is just additional resources. It does not include staff time.
any ballpark on that in relation to staff time, or is it something that's sort of be a hidden cost?
It would be significant in the sense that for that period of time, the IT section would have worked pretty much solidly on transferring to work from home arrangements, certainly for around 3 to 4 staff in particular, and others would have supported them through, plus keeping our regular activities running as best we could at the time.
Is it possible through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Nelson, to perhaps in his next report or response status report, that he just sort of give us provide to us a ballpark figure for staff time, please?
Well, I'll ask you to take that on board.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments, speakers? A right reply, Alderman Warren.
No, thanks.
So I'll put the motion then for 11.7.3 that council notes the report. If we could have a voting box, please. Okay, voting's open. The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. No items at items 12.1 and 12.2. 12.3, I propose that we take the answers to previous council meeting questions as read. So now moving to questions without notice from Alderman. I could start with Alderman Warren, please.
No, thank you, Mayor.
Alderman Walker. Questions without notice?
Yeah, all right. No, I'm just getting used to the non-horseshoe world, Your Worship.
Yeah, I am too. So thank you for your tolerance.
Okay. Look, my first question's in relation to what I'm going to loosely call the Vic Esplanade Master Plan. Now, in a whole other world, perhaps 3 to 4 meetings ago, I put a question through you to Mr. Lovell about this, who said that a workshop on it was imminent. Now, given the environment, I totally accept why that may not have occurred yet, but it is an important project. I'm wondering if that is likely that's something that will be coming before us soon.
Mr. Lovell?
Graham, sorry, Mr. Graham, I suspect.
Okay, Mr. Graham?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the General Manager is now trying to collate workshops to become to the Alderman, because there is a large bank of them to come up, and we're meeting budget time as well. So I think all the managers are giving the General Manager a list of what might be considered important for the manager and council to consider in terms of timing of coming up.
Yeah, so unfortunately it doesn't look as though we can put a date on it yet, Alderman Walker.
Look, thank you for that. I will do a very quick supplementary rhetoric, which is perhaps it's in these challenging environments, if there are staff officers that have got something, if they almost present it, that we can actually almost watch it online, and then maybe at workshops do some questioning then is something to consider. My second question is in relation to the variety of outside organisations of which we fund, Mr. Mayor, and or have membership in. So just, off the top of my head, it used to be STCA, for example, but certainly there's, Cycling South, there's CERTA, there'd be a range of them. Have any discussions been had around what measures they may be taking in reducing?
No, we won't record that at all.
Sorry, who was that in the background?
Sorry, that was me, Mayor. I thought I had my mic off, but I didn't know I was asked a question.
Right.
Okay, so
I don't think I've said anything.
Offering not to support anything that Alderman Walker asked.
Mr. Nelson, if there's something salacious that I've said, perhaps you can send me a text message about it. My question was...
Sorry, I was being asked a question about when the recording should end. It was a technical question.
Okay. Look, the bottom line with my question, Mr. Mayor, is around with the other entities that council's involved and sort of funds, these quasi-autonomous organisations, what discussions are being had around how they might change their format to reduce the required funds from us and other councils? And if you don't have an answer on that, would you be putting your mind to potentially allowing us to have an alderman work with you on this matter?
Crikeys.
Alderman James, please don't intercede.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Mayor, would you like me to respond to that?
Look, can I say in the first instance, I think the spirit of what Alderman Walker is asking, that we subscribe to a number of organisations, and I think that we'd be very interested in ensuring that they are putting their shoulder to the wheel as well, so to speak, and some assurance that before we agree in the budget session to resubscribing, that we've got some confidence that in our tight budget that it's value for money.
I did have in mind, Mayor, that that would be one of the issues that we discussed through our recurrent budget session, which we I think is off the top of my head is slated for the 11th. And at a simple question level, which of those organisations do we want to continue with or open a line of discussion and so forth? So I don't think it's for officers to make that decision. It's certainly a matter for council, so it's therefore a matter for a workshop.
Thank you. Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I would like to know, are we still in the period where the Clarence City Council business continuity and recovery planning policy is enacted?
General Manager, given that the plan is operational in nature, I'll defer the question to him.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the short answer is yes, it is. It's an interesting question in the sense that, like most business continuity plans, they're subject to review in terms of when you would need to change tack or reduce your effort and return back to a normal operating environment. At this stage, I suspect that in the next 2 weeks we'll reach that decision point, and I anticipate that'll probably be linked to the 15th of May in the context of any decisions by the state government regarding how responses to the pandemic are going to be changed or amended or loosened. So at this stage, I would say there's no change in the short term, but I would anticipate a discussion about whether we need to continue in the business continuity and mode for a longer period after that. Certainly something will be required, but I would be keen to return to a business as usual as close as we can get it as soon as possible after the 15th, if that's an option.
Mr. Mayor, I have a second question. Whilst we are under the Clarence City Council Business Continuity and Recovery Planning Policy and the plan associated with that policy, am I correct in understanding that the elected members have no formal role in the emergency response and that it is actually the leadership team that undertake that role?
Yes, that's correct. It's the situation around the business continuity and recovery plan is all about the organisation responding quickly to a crisis. And so the leadership process is abbreviated to deal with that in the context of the mayor and deputy mayor and general manager forming a leadership team that can make decisions. Those decisions in quite a lot of instances are operational in nature, not at a strategic or a long-term level. They're all about responding to the immediate crisis that is in front of the organisation. And it's all about maintaining services and continuity with the community. In the context of the leadership team, that doesn't change fundamentally the role of the Mayor and General Manager under the Local Government Act. General Manager still maintains responsibility for the operational conduct of the organisation, and the Mayor has primary responsibility as the spokesperson for the organisation.
Can I add to that too, Alderman Lamberto, that I do not see this business continuity plan as being anything other than operational. Any matters that would normally involve the full council, I would insist on coming back to and consulting the Alderman accordingly. The business continuity plan is structured directly at operational matters, and it's only in that context that I participate on that leadership team.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, I was just wondering if, probably through Mr. Graham, have we got any projects, and I should know this, but I cannot remember, any projects, roads, footpaths, whatever, on main roads? Because it'd be good to try to do those now while there's a little traffic around.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can get the Alderman an updated list on external and our internal resources as where they're at, but you'll see that, for example, on Rosny Hill Road, which is a busy road, that we're undertaking the multi-user pathway through that section. So now's a good time to do that. We will be commencing some work on Clarence Street, but I'll organise a briefing to the Alderman in terms of projects we're underway with at the moment.
Yes, Rosny Hill is a great time to be doing it. Mayor, second question, and I don't know if you or the General Manager can answer it. Going down to Cambridge to look at the agenda item, I notice there's nothing happening with the airport roundabout. I thought this would be a great time to be doing work there. Have you heard anything?
Mr. Graham?
Through Mr. Mayor, we understand that Department of State Growth have awarded the tender to Hazel Brothers, but it's a design and construct. So there will be significant design work occurring at the moment, and I would anticipate that it probably would coming through a planning approval as well. So it's going to take significant time for them to complete the design and get the necessary approvals before physical works will commence on site.
Thank you for that.
Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to the local planning provisions, which were recently advertised, and the time for community submissions is now well past. I understand that some of the procedures may have been impacted by the current issues, but what is the process for council dealing with those submissions, and what sort of time frame have we got?
General Manager.
Thank you. I might get Mr. Lovell to add his input, Mayor, but essentially I think the short answer is that was one of the workshop items that we had listed for early April. It's clearly been delayed by the COVID crisis, and that's on the list of workshops to bring before Alderman as soon as possible, and hopefully during May.
Mr. Mayor, my follow-on question is we're bringing into the workshop. What's the idea is that for each of the submissions or each of the local planning provisions that we discuss the submissions and we come back to a full council meeting to approve or to recommend or not recommend the content of the submission?
You've summed it up pretty accurately there. We'd be workshopping it at least once and then coming back to a full council meeting to certify whatever we've done and send it back to the Commission.
I'm just concerned, given the number of submissions we've received, we're going to have some pretty lengthy workshops discussing them.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to them.
That is a comment, not a question.
I'd like to, after this meeting's finished, perhaps talk about a couple of approaches we might take to workshops, but we'll do that shortly. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question for the General Manager through you, and that is just simply, could you give us an update on what percentage of staff are actually working from home at the moment?
GM.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. So through you, Mayor, I don't have a firm number in mind, but in terms of the staff working from the Chambers building, it's in the order of probably around about 75 to 80% of all staff are working from home. That fluctuates on a day-to-day basis as some people need to come in. Some areas have rosters so that people aren't working from home all the time, that they actually do come in and have some contact with work colleagues for different things, but obviously social distance and so forth. The outdoor workforce is they're all at work. There's obviously limited opportunity to work from home there. There's a couple of admin staff that are, but by and large, it's nearly 100% of our field workforce are out in the field. Within our childcare and family daycare operations, those staff are also at work because obviously childcare is not something you can do remotely. So yeah, predominantly for this office, around about 75 to 80%.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, two questions. Firstly, my question through you to Mr. Lovell in his capacity as the Manager of Planning. Mr. Lovell, a short while ago you advised us that the appellants had to resubmit their appeal to the tribunal in relation to Rosny Hill. Are you in a position to provide us with an update on where we are with the appeal process and as to whether there's any indication when the tribunal may make a decision, please?
Yeah, I'm on a bit of screen.
Through Mr. Mayor, I wonder if Mr. Nelson has been discussing this with our lawyer, so he might be in a better position to give some dates.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Lovell.
Off the top of my head, my recollection was a time. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I think there was a hearing date set down initially for the 25th of May. However, I understand that both the applicant and respondent, so the developer and Rosny Hill Friends Network through their lawyers, have sought an adjournment to a later time. So at this point in time, I don't think the Commission has determined that. We'll provide an update to Alderman as soon as we've got a firm date.
Thank you very much. Second question is, the Council passed a resolution for the Mayor to trot off to China with a letter from the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Tasmania purporting to be the service provider in relation to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Training development. Given the Mayor's discussions and involvement with this, can he provide Council with a definite timeline that Council did consider that timeline will be met by Shambrook and the University of Tasmania in plans for the hotel and training facility to be probably provided to Council on or before October 2020.
Just to correct the record there, Council didn't send me off with a letter from the Vice-Chancellor, Alderman James. You sent me off for other purposes, so I happen to carry a letter. But that aside, I will ask the General Manager if we've got an update in terms of the Shambrook application and when their plans are to start work.
Oh, come on, Mr. Mayor, you know the answer to this, don't you?
Alderman James, I think that's absolutely out of order, the way you've put that and the intent there. I do not know. I'm just as much in the dark as you are in terms of what their immediate plans are for submitting their plans to go ahead. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Our understanding is that that Shamroad and UTAS have been going through a detailed review of the design to make sure it's fit for purpose for the UTAS school proposal. And as far as we're aware at the moment, that is on track. As you'll be aware, they have until I think it's October or November, I think it's October, to commence, to achieve substantial commencement. We haven't heard from Shamroad or UTAS that there's been any change to that plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Newington.
Where am I? Oh, I'm still here. Yeah, look, I'll thank you, Alderman Mulder, for jumping the gun on that same question. So I'm really interested in seeing what we put forward in relation to
Have you got another question, Alderman Newington?
Submissions.
Have you?
Of course I do. But I just want to ask about, yeah, I've got it. I want to ask about the status of works to repair the steps in Little Howrah Beach, with all the people running up and down the beach and the stairs. I know I spoke to the GM about this quite a while ago, that there were funds sitting there, and the disability access onto the beach as well from the zigzag path going down to the beach.
Mr. Graham, can you help there, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll chase that up with our depot crew and project managers, and I'll advise all the aldermen through a briefing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Hello, thanks. Last meeting I asked about JobKeeper, which was before the policy went through, and I see that since then the CEO of LGAT has significantly toughened her language on that. I just wondered if there was any update in the Clarence City Council's position.
Well, Clarence City Council hasn't considered it since, so there's been no change.
Thank you. Okay, the second question, I was on Seek the other day and saw a business advisor job advertised and under the title of Clarence City Council. Now, I appreciate there might be some confusion about who's paying for this when it's under the umbrella of, what is it under the umbrella of? Bear with me. Other councils. However, the title says Clarence City Council and the email address to inquire is a staff member at Clarence City Council. So I just wonder, in light of particularly Alderman Walker's questioning about hiring of new staff, if we could get some clarity about whether we're contributing to that, or if it's state government, or if it's shared, or what the deal is, please.
Are you, through you, Mayor, Alderman Edmonds, are you able to send that to me? Because I'm actually not sure what you're referring to. I'm happy to provide a response. I'm just not entirely sure what.
Oh, sorry, it's the South East Region Development Association advertising a part-time job, 0.6 pro rata, $100,000 a year, and it says Clarence City Council. And if you want to inquire about the job, you contact Clarence City Council. So I'm happy to put that on notice, and I'll email it through.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, my question through you to Mr. Graham is just regarding the status of the Lincoln Street pedestrian safety report following our October 21 motion of last year.
Mr. Graham.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the final report's been received by the consultants, and a workshop is being prepared to be presented to council when we get an available opportunity.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alderman Chong.
That's quite all right, Mr. Mayor. No, thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the close of the open session of council. If I could have a motion to go into closed session, please.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Seconded Alderman Pears, was it?
Yes.
Thank you. Being procedural, can we have a voting box, please, for item 13?
At the conclusion of this vote, Mr. Mayor, I'll be calling it a night. I'm not sure how to turn it off, but anyway, I'll try in a minute.
Alderman James,
Finishing shortly.
I'm very tempted to give you some advice on that, Alderman James.
I'm sure you are. It got a bit heated there for you, Douglas. I mean, Alderman Chipman. Sorry. Okay.
So voting's open on going into closed session.
So, Mr. General Manager, I will click the little cross at the top right, and that will see me out. Good night, all.
Try the red hang up button.
Okay, motion is carried unanimously. Confirm the video is off, please.